Susie the Mermaid and the Seahorse Farm. One sunny morning, Susie the Mermaid was swimming near a large coral reef with her friend, Bob the Octopus. Bob was trying to braid a strand of seaweed. There was only one problem. He had accidentally braided all of his tentacles together. "Bob," said Susie, "did you wrap yourself up again?" "This was not an accident," Bob replied seriously. "I am practicing a new underwater style, marine macrame." Just then a small seahorse quickly swam past them. He was carrying a tiny shrimp in his mouth. "Oh, sorry, I'm late for work," he squeaked. "Work?" Susie asked, surprised. "Of course, at the farm." The seahorse replied and disappeared into the seaweed. Susie froze. "A farm?" Bob became immediately interested. "If it's a farm, there must be cows." "Bob," said Susie, "there are no cows in the ocean." Bob thought for a moment. "How can there be no cows? What about sea cows?" Susie paused. "Well, actually, there are manatees." "See?" Bob said triumphantly. "I knew the cows were here somewhere." The mysterious farm. Susie decided to find out what kind of farm this was. They followed the little seahorse. Soon they arrived at a huge forest of seaweed, and inside there were hundreds of seahorses. Some of them were hanging onto seaweed with their curly tails. Some were swimming slowly. Some were catching tiny shrimp, and some looked like they were simply sleeping. An old seahorse with a long seaweed mustache swam toward them. "Welcome," he said. "I am Farmer Swift-tail." "Do you run this farm?" Susie asked. "That's right. We grow food, raise baby seahorses, and occasionally create a little chaos." Bob nodded. "That sounds like an underwater kindergarten." "What seahorses eat?" The farmer pointed at tiny transparent dots floating in the water. "That is plankton and tiny shrimp. Seahorses love eating them." "But how do they eat them?" Susie asked. "Like a vacuum cleaner." Bob suddenly jumped. "Do not say that word. I have bad memories involving vacuum cleaners." The farmer laughed. "A seahorse simply sucks the food into its mouth. Sometimes they can eat up to 3,000 tiny shrimp in one day." Bob opened his mouth wide. 3,000? "After 3 sandwiches, I already consider myself a hero." How seahorses live. The farmer showed them their tails. "See, seahorses have prehensile tails. They wrap their tails around seaweed so the ocean currents don't carry them away." Susie decided to try. She grabbed a piece of seaweed. Suddenly the currents spun her around. Susie started spinning like a little underwater flag. Bob watched for a few seconds. Then he said, "This is a new underwater attraction, the Susie Carousel." Susie finally stopped spinning. I was experimenting. I noticed, Bob said. A very fast experiment. The most surprising fact. The farmer swam closer. And now for the most interesting part. In seahorses, the father gives birth to the babies. Susie blinked. Bob blinked too. What? They said together. The mother places the eggs into a special pouch over the father's belly. The father carries them, and later he releases the baby seahorses into the water. Bob whispered slowly. How many? Sometimes up to 1,000. Bob slowly floated backwards. I need some time to think about this life. Tiny seahorse babies. Suddenly a father seahorse swam by, and then, poof! From his pouch came dozens of tiny baby seahorses. Wow, said Susie. They look like little bubbles. The babies floated everywhere. Some immediately wrapped their tiny tails around seaweed. Others spun playfully in the water. Do the parents take care of them? Susie asked. A little, said the farmer, but they become independent very quickly. In the ocean you must learn fast. Susie's lesson. As Susie and Bob swam back home, Susie said, Seahorses are small, but they are very hard-working and very unusual, and the fathers are real heroes. Bob nodded. And they eat 3,000 shrimp. That is the most important part. Susie laughed. No, the most important thing is this. Even very small creatures can do very big things. Bob thought about it. Then I can too. Susie looked at his 8 tentacles. Well, you might even have extra chances. That evening Susie sat on her favorite warm rock near the reef. Soft bubbles slowly floated upward. And she thought, the ocean is full of amazing creatures, and every one of them has a story. Sometimes you just need to swim a little farther to discover it. And tomorrow, maybe, Susie will find a starfish farm. No, shouted Bob. They are too spiky.